I don't want to make a zoo. I don't want to take care of those animals for eternity. I want them to live on their own. And in order to have a sustainable ecosystem, it's extremely important to have all niches filled in this ecosystem.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World. I'm Ben Goldsmith, and this is really an epic episode, maybe the most epic that we've ever recorded, because I'm sitting here with Nikita Zimov, who's in the wilds of Siberia. I've been reading about Nikita and his father's Pleistocene rewilding project, and its massive potential ramifications for the world for at least a decade. And now I'm finally here with you, Nikita. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for the invitation. My pleasure.
So where exactly are you recording from in Siberia, Nikita?
Right now I'm in central Siberia. So we wanted to record about a month ago, but at that time it was at our national park in Yakutia, and internet connection is not great out there. So we had to wait until I'm back on the mainland.
So the big idea that Nikita and his father have been working on, with a growing band of supporters and followers around the world, is that we might restore the great grassland ecosystems of the Arctic, of the polar region in the north. These enormous grasslands that we know from Disney cartoons and from storybooks, with mammoths and yaks and muskox and huge herds of wild horses and bison, some of the most productive landscapes that the world has known in modern times. And of course, those disappeared during the dawn of humanity, probably because of hunting, possibly climatic factors. So the big vision, Nikita, that you have is to rewild the tundras and restore that grassland ecosystem. So what plants are they that are under your feet in the actual tundra? Is it just mosses and lichens, or are they grasses at all?
There are some grasses, yeah, but they are not dominant, and usually they are not in this, let's say, very productive rate. So the problem is productivity in the Arctic. In order to have productive ecosystem, you need to have two things. First of all, you need to have very active production, direct, like photosynthesis. You need to have active photosynthesis. In this case, you may have a very good and productive ecosystem. Photosynthesis, it's a photochemical reaction. It depends on the light. And as I said, here in the Arctic, during the summer period, we have ton of light. I think in our region, we can have photosynthesis 24/7 in the summer. So maybe it's not very warm, but there is plenty of vegetation which actively photosynthesize at +1, +5. So the question is just the duration of this time when the water is liquid. So basically from beginning of June to end of August. So that's our vegetative period. So it's not that bad. However, the main difference why the Arctic now is so less productive compared with central or tropical territories is that the other branch of this productivity, of this kind of cycling, is that we have extremely slow decomposition in the Arctic. So in order to have productive ecosystem, we need everything to grow quickly and then decay quickly. So if you have this cycle, if your nutrients, if your nitrogen, phosphorus cycle through the ecosystem as fast as possible, then you have productive ecosystem. And the problem that we have active photosynthesis, but extremely slow decomposition. And if we have a grass, the grass will grow, but it will stay dead for maybe several years and holding all the nutrients inside and kind of shading and not allowing new grass to grow better. So that's a problem. So the main reason why modern ecosystems are low productive and cannot feed many animals, because right now the vegetation is very slowly growing. And the reason for that is that we have very slow decomposition. If it would be warmer climate, the decomposition would be more rapid. And the main difference, what we are trying to achieve, is to restore it to the way how ecosystems functioned back in the time. So just 15, 20, 30,000 years ago, when everything was dominated by these high productive grazing ecosystems with mammoths, bison, horses, and all other animals, is that back then, decomposition was not happening in the air, in the cold, dry air, but all decomposition of all above ground biomass was happening in the stomachs of animals. Everything that grew during the summer was eaten by the end of the spring, and all the nutrients were recycled and put back. In the summer, if you have a new grass growing in June, the bison come, they chew the grass, and they return the fertilizers 24 hours later. And these fertilizers are getting picked up maybe the same season. So in tundra, where there is no animals right now, I think the nutrient cycling, I read some data that stated that lifetime of nitrogen cycling through the ecosystem is more than 100 years. If you have bison, you can have it like up to a year. And imagine that it's a comparison like with economy. Imagine you want to make money. You can have a business which give you 50% profit, but the turnover is 10 years. Or it can give you 5% profit, but turnover is 1 week. What would you choose?
Yeah, I understand. Well, and that is to say, at the moment, there are no herbivores. So in that enormous tundra landscape that you described, where you're sitting now, which stretches around Siberia, northern Russia, northern Scandinavia, I guess Alaska, it's the whole circle. What wildlife do we find there now, if any?
Yeah, you can find some wildlife, but it's at extremely low densities. At the densities where animals can't really change the landscape. So what you can find in the wildlife right now is moose. In some places you can find some wild reindeer, but I think in the last 20, 30 years, the population of wild reindeer collapsed. I cannot say exactly why is that, either due through excessive hunting or because of the climate change. And I suspect maybe even the climate change is starting to cause troubles for animals. And what else? You can have some bears, some wolverines, hares, poor foxes. Now there is some muskox getting reintroduced into the Arctic, but it's a kind of new thing.
So how long do we have to go back in history since there were Serengeti-like herds of large herbivores in that landscape?
Okay, so the most fertile and the richest, I think it was about 30,000 years ago. Then the population slowly declined during the last glacial maximum, which was, let's say, 20 to 15,000 years ago. At that time, it was extremely cold in the region, so there was less animals. Still way, way more than what we have now, but less. And then, around 14,670 years ago, or something like that, climate have rapidly changed. So the glaciation ended, and the climate have changed, and that... So there became more precipitation, it became warmer, and the productivity of all ecosystems increased. And at that time, there was like a burst of animal population in the entire Eurasia and in the Arctic. However, that didn't last long. Unfortunately, following the warming, first humans managed to enter the Arctic. And when humans enter the Arctic, what they start to do, they start to hunt.
So can you just paint a picture for me, please, Nikita, of how it would have been? What animals were there before those humans arrived? What were there and in what kind of numbers? Just describe to me a little bit the image.
We actually did manage to estimate densities of different animals living in that environment, in this ecosystem, for the region where the Pleistocene Park is quite well. So we still have permafrost. The climate is getting warmer and permafrost might be degrading soon, but it still exists. And in some places where the river is eroding the permafrost, they're kind of exposing the soils which used to be in this ecosystem. And these frozen soils in the permafrost, they are holding bones of animals. And bones of animals which lived there, 20, 30, 40,000 years ago. And if you carefully collect all those bones and make the proper analysis, you can actually estimate the density of animals. And we made a publication more than 10 years ago in a very prestigious international scientific journal. And we found that on every square kilometer of that territory used to live, on average, in the late Pleistocene, on every square kilometer, 1 mammoth, 5 bison, 8 horses, and 15 reindeer, about 1 wolf, and approximately maybe 1 lion per 5/10 kilometers.
So we are talking massive aggregations of animals, like the
Yeah.
Great Plains of America before the arrival of the Europeans, that kind of numbers.
I think maybe even more. Great Plains of America were already the subject of huge biodiversity loss. So the first humans which entered Eurasia and dropped the number of animals in our place moved further, went through Beringia, reached North America and killed much more animals there. And when they reached South America, they killed like every single species. There was more than 50 species of big herbivores with body weight over 44 kilograms in South America. And none of them persisted after the end of the glaciation. So they all vanished. And we suspect that we know that climate wasn't that different for that region. And the only difference is that first humans appeared.
So the big idea is to restore these densities of herbivores so that they can act as decomposition machines for the dead vegetation and accelerate that nutrient transfer so that fresh grasses can grow and outcompete the lichens and the mosses and the little spruce trees and so on, and restore that hyper-productive grassland ecosystem, and also through their trampling and their hooves and so on. And in the process, bring back something that may look a little like what those early humans would have seen 10, 15,000 years ago when they first penetrated the Arctic as the ice receded. This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com.
Yes, you explain it shorter and without thick Russian accent. So, yes.
So how are you going to do that, Nikita? What animals have you brought? What kind of space are you playing in? What is the game plan for this incredibly compelling and exciting and radical vision that you have?
First of all, there is kind of some problems which we have to explain. We are blaming humans in the destruction of this ecosystem. Because sometimes people say that, no, it wasn't humans, it was the climate. And if the climate was suitable for this ecosystem back in the time and not suitable right now, then what we are doing right now is not making sense. Kind of, the climate is different, those animals will not be able to survive. And we also did quite a big analysis at looking where the animals used to live in Pleistocene and then Holocene and see if they could manage to live in the modern environment. And there is now enough evidences showing that animals persisted, like bison, for example, persisted in the Russian Arctic up until 9,000 years ago. So the climate changed 14,000 years ago, and bison were still present 9,000 years ago. And, for example, if climate doesn't suit you, you usually die, first winter, maybe winter after, or in 20 years at most. But if you're living there for 5,000 years, there is no way it's about the climate. So the idea of the park is very simple. If humans manage to destroy these ecosystems by dropping down number of animals, and what's most importantly, they kept the number of animals low for a long time. So they managed to keep it low for decades, for centuries. And that took enough time for grasslands to degrade. And then we will do the opposite. We'll bring back animals and keep them in high densities long enough, so maybe artificially, so we provide them forage in the winter, so we keep them at high density artificially. But this number of animals allowing already to have impact on the vegetation. The more animals graze, the more they're present on the landscape, the more grasses start to grow. So animals are accelerating nutrient cycling. They're kind of allowing grasses to take over. And that's what we do in the park. So we're bringing in animals and we are making them converting grasslands for us.
So which animals have you already brought and into what area size?
We right now own a territory of 460 square kilometers in the park, of which, honestly saying, we managed to fence only 10%. So we have around 2,000 hectares fenced right now. With animals, we did many expeditions to bring animals from the Arctic, from other places. And sometimes some animals prove to be good, some are worse. And first, we started when the project just in the first years, when I was still a child and in university later on, we were focusing on animals we could find locally. So we never had enough resources for big expeditions. And we were focusing on getting some domestic reindeer, some Yakutian horses, which are also native Yakutians are keeping as the domestic animals, which they keep them for meat. And also we had some moose in the region. So these were the three main herbivores which we tried to work with originally. And later on, when we got somewhat bigger, when we start to get a little bit more support, then when we were starting to make kind of more money doing science, we started to manage to get some other animals. And kind of the most successful ones were kind of definitely the muskox and the bison. So American bison proved to be a very extremely good animal for this environment, same as muskox. And also we now have a population of camels in the Pleistocene Park. Bakshian camels from Mongolia. They're, let's say, never been really present in the Arctic, but they're extremely good at cutting down tall shrubs. So in terms of our environmental activity, that's like they're top notch.
Was there any native camel of any kind in the Arctic Circle historically?
Historically, there were some. I think there was never found bones of camels in the Pleistocene, but I read some papers that they did a genetic analysis of the soils of that territory, and they found that there have been some cases of camels entering in. So maybe they were not present, but at the same time, the situation and the climate which used to be in our place 20,000 years ago is very different from what it was, let's say, a century ago, and very different from what we have right now. So we are facing the extremely, extremely rapid warming.
And what about the bison that you're using? Is that the wood bison? The North American bison has subspecies called the wood bison, which they've been reintroducing in parts of Alaska. Or is it the plains bison that you find in Montana?
We are using plains bison. These two species are extremely, extremely similar. The main difference which they have, it's legal. So they're legally different. For example, in Russia, wood bison, it's a red book species. And plains bison, it's cattle, according to kind of Russian rules. So it's much easier to deal with cattle than with red book species. But from what I heard from specialists, they're like pretty much identical. Switch them places and they will switch how they look like.
And have you been getting those bison from wild living populations inside Russia or from elsewhere?
No, unfortunately, there is little to no population of bison in Russia. So it took us almost somewhere close to 20 years between my father's desires to get bison until the time when in 2019 we finally did our first successful expedition with the bison. It was extremely hard. There was some maybe zoos, some private owners of very small herds of bison, so there is no way you could find bison in Russia. And our successful attempt was actually bringing bison from one farm in Denmark, where they are kept for meat.
And what about the muskox? What exactly is a muskox? I've never seen one.
Muskox, it's actually a goat. So even though in Russian it's called sheep bull, it's not a sheep and it's not a bull, it's a goat. It's extremely big goat, which was almost extinct about 70 years ago. And at that time, they persisted only in Greenland and in Arctic Canada, in small numbers. So they're extremely sturdy animals and they're quite fearful. And the problem with them that they have a very good strategy to protect themselves against wolves. That in case of danger, they're in the herd and they have a very, very powerful horns. And with those horns, they can easily kill animals, kind of any animal they can easily kill with those horns. So there is a male and adult females are kind of sticking in the circle with the horns out, all the babies inside the herd. So it's pretty much impossible to attack such a herd. So it's a very troubling thing. But against person with a gun, that's the worst case strategy. So because if you have a gun, you see the herd, they are kind of gathering, looking at you with their horns, and you're just shooting them all. So that's I think that's the reason why they almost went extinct. And there have been a lot of activities trying to kind of repopulate Arctic with them, and quite successful. So they are present now in Alaska and in many places in Russia.
So Nikita, from past expeditions, how many animals do you have now in the 2,000 hectare, sort of nearly 5,000 acre enclosure?
Now we have around something about 150 animals. So not that many, but let's say that's a number which we are able to keep in the territory and maintain during the winters to allow them to have impact on the vegetation.
And are you seeing any impact on the vegetation already?
Oh, yes, we do. Yes, definitely we do. So normally when the people come to the Pleistocene Park and they come from the place when they've never been in this part of the Arctic, before I take them to the park, I take them to the places which are outside of the park. And so we drive by the boat. It's about maybe an hour boat ride from our base camp near the town to the Pleistocene Park itself. And as we go, I stopped by at the shore and said, okay, you get out and walk, 100 meters that direction. And I said, why? I said, just do it. So people get out, walk, and they kind of see the landscape. And it's extremely, extremely hard to walk through this landscape. If it's a shrub, it's hard to walk through. Then there is a tussocks, and it's swampy, and it's totally complicated landscape to kind of navigate through. And then we get to the park, and then they get to this landscape, which seem way more like kind of the parks which you're used to in, I don't know, somewhere in Europe or in America. And because if I would take them to this park, to the Pleistocene Park directly from the, I don't know, from the Central Park in New York, they wouldn't see that huge of a difference. They would think it's normal. But they need to compare it how the Arctic look right now.
So are you doing a bunch of scientific studies and gathering data to show that your thesis works, that if you restore these heavy, hardy herbivores in sufficient density, they will do the act of fermentation in the ecosystem, thereby allowing the grasses to dominate once again?
Yes, we do quite a lot of science, definitely not enough science. Unfortunately, science is an expensive and complicated thing to do, but we're trying our best to get as many information as possible. And the ideas behind our project is not only that we are restoring the biodiversity and productivity. Our kind of probably the main focus of science which we are talking about, and the thing which we haven't discussed yet, is that we are trying to prove that these high productive grazing ecosystems in the Arctic can be a good tool to mitigate climate change. And this climate mitigating possibilities of this ecosystem is that something that we are measuring.
So I had Tom Olson, a Canadian bison expert and conservationist, on this podcast series not so long ago. And he was describing to me the depth of the fescue grasses in the North American plains in terms of their roots going deep into the earth. Fescue grasses which are dependent upon the grazing and the trampling of bison, and the enormous amounts of carbon that are sequestered in those grasslands, even more than in the boreal forest to the west of where his ranches are. So can you please tell me a little bit about that? If we were theoretically able to restore these great Arctic Serengetis with bison and muskox and camels and so on, and perhaps even mammoths, and I'd like to talk about that at one stage, what would the impact be in terms of sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and solving the climate problem?
First of all, it's not only about the carbon, and we'll get back to that. But if we're talking about solely about carbon, let me give you some numbers. So, as you said, the idea is that if you have vegetation which is forming deep roots, which is actively growing, you're kind of digging this carbon, which was the CO2 in the atmosphere, picked up by photosynthesis, converted into root, buried into the ground. In the ground, cold, the colder you get, so the more you go to the Arctic, the stronger is the effect. The lower is decomposition. If you have permafrost underneath, your active layer where the roots are will be frozen most of the year. It will be extremely cold. So if you have a root which grew there this year, it will stay there for centuries. This grass will die next year, the new grass will grow, new roots will come. And so this will kind of continuously building up the carbon pool. And now back to the numbers. In the modern ecosystem, where it's dominated by mosses and large trees, our large trees is not like the trees which you're used to in the kind of in UK or I don't know in the United States or somewhere in Africa. Our trees are very small, very tall, very thin, and you cannot really get a lot of biomass in the above ground vegetation. So these ecosystems in our landscape have around 2 kilograms of carbon per square meter. 2 kilograms. Below ground, even with these soils which have roots only near the surface, so the large trees doesn't form any deep roots. So all the carbon is at, let's say, usually top 20, 30 centimeters, maybe even less. And there we get around 10 kilograms per square meter. So your modern ecosystem carries 2 kilograms on the surface, 10 kilograms below ground. And another problem that in the recent years, these top 2 kilograms start to burn extremely frequently. So, we can start to get forest fires with climate change, and it's causing big troubles. So anyway, 12 kilos, that's all you get. if you convert the landscape into the pasture, you will have, let's say, at most, you will have half kilo of carbon per square meter on the surface, probably less, let's say 300 grams of carbon per square meter. But at the same time, after some time of the pasture, several decades, let's say, it will take, maybe it's centuries, but you can potentially get 60, 70, maybe up to 100 kilograms of carbon per square meter. So instead of 12, you can get 100.
So it's a staggering improvement if those numbers play out in the way that you think they will.
Yes.
And there's also the added benefit of trapping the methane that is currently leaking from under the ground in the Arctic Circle. What's that about?
Yeah, with methane. So with methane, the story a little bit more complicated. So because there is a kind of pros and cons. First of all, everybody, so the question which is often I get asked, you are bringing bison and other animals, and animals are the main source of methane, which is not exactly true. Yes, animals emit methane, but at the same time, the main source of methane on our planet right now are different types of wetlands. So it's the boreal wetland. So actually, central Siberia, so just north of the place where I am right now, there is the world's largest wetland. And that's, I think, one of the largest emitter of methane globally. Then there is tropical wetlands, and there is rice paddies. And all these things emit enormous amounts of methane. Let's say 3-4 times more than all modern cattle combined. Maybe even more than that. So the situation that right now Arctic is low productive. So vegetation is low productive, low photosynthesis, little water is evaporated. So there is no water evaporating from the ground, and you have permafrost underneath, which doesn't allow drainage. And majority of the landscape where we are right now, it's a very moist landscape. If it's moist, there is no oxygen in the ground. No oxygen in the ground, you get methane production. And if you have high productive ecosystems, your soils will be dry because grasses will dry out the soil, and there will be no methane coming out of the soils and of the landscape. So only methane will be coming from bison, let's say. And that will be, according to our estimates, 1/3 to 1/4 of what would otherwise be emitted from this landscape if there would be wet soils.
So this might be one of the solutions, or the solution to one of the biggest climate problems we face, which is methane leakage in the north. What about albedo and the reflection of sunlight back into the atmosphere?
Albedo is solely the strongest effect ever, directly, because CO2 is it's a second order effect, and that our entire world is talking about a second order effect. But albedo is extremely important. If we right now paint our planet white, the winter will start and never end. So we don't want that to happen, but if we'll tune our ecosystems by changing albedo by 0.1 or 0.2, that will solve pretty much all our problems with climate change. And the Arctic and Siberia is huge, and there is huge possibilities for such ecosystem restoration. So yes, albedo is extremely, extremely important. So combined with CO2 sequestration and lower methane emissions, that's huge effect.
And the reason why the albedo is altered is because the grass is more reflective than the vegetation that is growing now, the scrub and the mosses and so on.
Yes, definitely. The large trees are extremely dark, especially in the winter. And in the spring, the effect is huge. The grasslands are covered with snow, they're white. And the forest is standing outside dark. We have measurements which show 10 degrees difference. Let's say it's a place is 200 meters away from each other. It's a forest and it's a pasture. And it's 10 degrees difference in April during daytime. 10 degrees, come on.
And what about your next expedition, Nikita? And how are you going to go from 2,000 hectares and 150 of these heavy herbivores up to a landscape scale program? How are we going to do this? What's the mission to make this happen on the scale that it needs to happen?
We were trying to get muskox, and there is no way you can buy muskox. You can only find them in the wildlife. You need to rent a huge helicopter for 2 weeks, fly to some remote island in the middle of nowhere, or Taimyr Peninsula, the most northern peninsula in Eurasia, and fly there for 2 weeks and try to catch those horses and use veterinary sedation and shoot with tranquilizers animals and get them into cages, and then rent a big airplane to transport them to the place where you need. And the budget of this activity is enormous because it's close to $500,000, let's say. And that's something that no kind of restoration project, at least in Russia, ever could manage. And I decided that we will want to do it differently. And 2 years ago, I flew to Vladivostok, which is in Japan Sea, next to Japan, and bought old Japanese fishing calamari vessel, 20 meter long. And we threw out all the calamari fishing equipment and converted that ship into a muskox transporter. And last summer, I hired a captain and took a mechanic, and we took off from Vladivostok all the way to our park in Chersky, which is 7,000 kilometers, with idea to get there and pick up veterinaries, pick up rangers, and then go further to Taimyr Peninsula and catch muskox there. And the idea was that we could do it all last year, but we didn't manage because when we passed the Bering Strait, we were stuck in ice. So there was Arctic ice floating in August, and which was very unexpected for us. And for a month, whole month, we were stuck in the ice. And then when we finally reached our place in park, it was too late to go. And this year, we finally managed to get further. And we reached the kind of Taimyr Peninsula, and the island near Taimyr, we caught 15 muskox and got back. And it took, 11,000 kilometers, and total, it was 75 days expedition for all of us. And it was, let's say, the most complicated thing we did logistically. And so that's kind of explaining what difficulties we have to face working with that.
Nikita, on that note, what's it like living out in the Siberian tundras like that all year round? And not just on these incredible expeditions that you're doing to bring animals back to the project, but just day to day?
Many people say that, I cannot live there. There is no cinema. There is no Starbucks or something like that. And I disagree with that. As long as you have something important and you like your job and you're enjoying what you're doing, then it doesn't really matter where you are. So it's fine. How do we grow? First of all, we need to get some pastures established where animals will be able to live on their own. Then we need to kind of extend the territory, increase number of animals, and most importantly, in order to have sustainable ecosystems. So, I don't want to make a zoo. I don't want to take care of those animals for eternity. I want them to live on their own. And in order to have a sustainable ecosystem, it's extremely important to have all niches filled in this ecosystem. And probably one of the most important niche without which no grazing ecosystem will be sustainable, it's predators. So once we have enough animals, we need to get some predators in. It's say the wolf or some maybe lions or tiger, Amur tiger. So that's kind of still kind of debatable because we're still quite far away. But without predators, no ecosystem is possible. Because if you don't have predators, animals will be doing overgrazing. So predators not only kind of maintaining the density of animals, they are also shaping the grazing behavior. Without predators, all your cattle will do overgrazing.
Nikita, what do you feel about the work that's being done by Colossal, the venture in the US, to bring back the mammoth, working with DNA taken from dead mammoths that got preserved in the peat and using an Asian elephant surrogate to produce the first mammoths? I'm told it's a genuine possibility. Does that excite you or does it fill you with dread?
No, I'm quite excited about that. Let's say I am not part of Colossal. I am not really aware of how far they did progress. I understand that it's a very complicated thing to do. Also, I understand that there will be no mammoths present in the Arctic anytime soon anyway. Despite how successful they will be with restoration, it's just the problem that mammoths, they take forever to grow. You can make a colony of cloned mammoths very quickly, but cloned mammoths, not really. So it's just taking a lot of time. So, but at the same time, as I said, the more niches, ecological niches you have filled in the ecosystem, the more sustainable your ecosystem is. With mammoths, I'm sure grazing ecosystems will be more aggressive. Every single time, if you look at the history of grazing ecosystems anywhere, in Africa, in North America, in the Arctic, in Siberia, there would always be elephant. Some sort of elephant. Sometimes it's African elephant, sometimes it's mammoth. In North America, I think there was 3 species of elephant. So there would be always a niche for elephant. And I would believe that with mammoths, grazing ecosystems would be way more aggressive and be able to expand much faster. So if they will succeed one day, then I would be happy with that.
Nikita, it's one of the most radical ideas in rewilding or conservation or even in climate science. If you can show that this works and it gets rolled out on a big scale and we see vast herds of herbivores back in the Arctic, it'll be the most exciting thing that ever happened in the nature movement. So I really wish you all the best. And I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to tell me the story on the podcast. Thank you for joining me. I'm excited to follow your progress.
Yeah, you said radical. I'm not sure it's very radical. The radical is the thing that, right now the climate is changing rapidly. And it will change the landscape in the Arctic dramatically because permafrost will degrade in the next several decades, And that will be the death of all the modern ecosystems out there. So all the landscape will be destroyed, and that's radical. What we're trying to do, we are just trying to get things back to normal and trying to avoid this radical scenario. So I would think, I wouldn't use the term radical for our work.
So for the most intrepid of our listeners, perhaps a visit to the Siberian tundra and to the Pleistocene Rewilding project with Nikita might be on the cards. Thank you, Nikita, for your time.
Nice talking to you, Ben.
While I was sitting there talking to Nikita, I couldn't help hoping that there's a big philanthropist or someone who runs a big foundation listening to the podcast who's thinking, perhaps this is worth a major investment, because if they could scale up and bring more animals in and get more space, maybe they're onto something very, very exciting here. Certainly, I have left that conversation feeling very inspired. My mind has been blown wide open about the possibilities in the far north. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please go onto whatever platform you use to get your podcast. Give us a like, give us a share, spread the word among your friends and colleagues. It all makes a big difference in growing our listener numbers. We're building quite a community here. Thank you. Next time, I'm going to be talking to Bev Nichols, who has one of the coolest job titles in England. He is the Forest Wilding Programme Manager at one of England's largest landowning organisations, which is Forestry England. Bev really knows how ecosystems work. He's filled with imagination and vision, and he's transforming one of the most important landholdings in the country. I was lucky enough to walk around my place in Somerset with Bev during the summer, and I learned so much from him, and I'm just very excited to have got him on the podcast. I hope you'll join us.